It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Jonas Bordo, CEO and co-founder of Dwellsy, the free residential rental marketplace that makes it easy to find, hard to find rentals. Prior to co-founding Dwellsy, Jonas was a senior executive at several leading real estate firms, including Essex Property Trust and Bentall GreenOak, and was also with the Boston Consulting Group after graduating with his MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Jonas has had the good fortune to build, rebuild, and lead amazing teams across the multifamily and commercial real estate operational and strategic spectrum, manage large P&Ls, and deliver big profit increases. He is husband to Rosalind and father to Bailey and her two younger twin siblings, Zach and Thea. Jonas is an avid hiker, a lifelong learner, and a maker of things, sometimes out of wood. Jonas Bordo, welcome into the corner office.
Brand, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, well, this is a real treat for me. And with full disclosure to our audience, Jonas and I have known each other for about 5 years, I think, going on 6.
Yep.
You were a client and one of my best, I might say, in a couple of years there while you were at Essex. And I am also an investor in Dwellsy. So for those of you that will notice my peak of interest with regards to Jonas and his background, I want to make sure you're all aware of that and just so excited to hear your story. You know, I know a little bit about you, but as we get between the lines, we'll learn a lot more and, you know, very excited to have this journey together with you. But let's start with kind of what everyone's on top of our minds. We're mid-August, actually going into the third week of August. This might not be released until sometime in the early fall, but the pandemic has been all around us. How are you doing? How's your family? And how's the team at Dwellsy during these interesting times?
You know, Brent, I am just so fortunate in this time and just reminded of the privilege that I experience every day because we are doing pretty well. It's a little stir crazy.
Yep.
But fortunate to be helming a business.
3 kids at home, I can imagine.
Yeah, 3 small kids at home. But I do feel like they're in kind of that sweet spot where we've got 6-year-olds and an 8-year-old, and they're happy to be home and not so needy at this point that we need to be on them at all times. So they're holding up pretty well.
And your team, how's everybody doing at work?
Team is doing really well. It's a little scattered. It's a challenge to build a company culture when everybody is remote all the time. So we're wrestling with that on a day-to-day basis.
And you were kind of remote beforehand, right? You had a couple of people that were working out of the office, or were you all pretty much coming into the office every day prior to the pandemic?
Most of us were coming together one day a week, but working remotely most of the time.
Right.
But it's
not a big shift in that area.
Yeah, it's not a big shift. There's all kinds of interesting thoughts on talking about working remotely. We should talk about it at some point. Absolutely.
Oh, goodness. Yes. It's been very interesting times. Well, let's start with you and your early years. I know that you're a dual citizen, Canadian and U.S., but I think grew up in Canada. Tell us a little bit about your early life, parents, siblings, and, what that was like.
Yeah. Born and raised in Toronto, fabulous city to grow up in, even more fabulous city today than when I grew up there. Right. It seemed like a bit of a backwater at a certain point to me, and I couldn't wait to get out of there. And then had the chance, my career took me back there later on in life, and was just amazed at what a dynamic global city it had become.
So fortunate
to grow up there with a couple of siblings and My parents had split early on, but both very connected to me, and very fortunate to be raised in a loving family.
Both stayed nearby. Were you kind of going between homes growing up, or did you stay with one over the other?
Yeah, it was a little bit crazy. Half a week with each week. So shuttling back and forth constantly.
Right.
Which
And
nice
you had
to be wanted, but
brothers and sisters as well that were doing that as with you, or?
No, I was the only one doing that, actually.
Got it. And any other siblings that came along later, or pretty much grown up as an only child?
Actually, a very interesting combination of factors, because I actually have 5 siblings, but
oh my gosh,
basically grew up as an only child.
Wow.
So my siblings range in age across the span of about 30 years.
Yeah.
So there's my running joke is it's the nuclear family,
right.
Different kind of nuclear.
Now, were you at the tail end of that range, or in the middle, or at the top?
I'm kind of the middle child, upper middle, I guess you could say.
Yeah, cool. And what did mom and dad do?
So both entrepreneurs.
Wow,
my
cool.
mother
no big
had
surprise there.
Yeah, my mother had a whole series of businesses, everything from health food stores to consignment clothing shops.
Wow.
Actually just sold her last business a couple of months ago. And my father had a variety of different businesses over the years, but primarily in the retirement home and nursing home space.
Got it. Hence your interest in real estate, which eventually led to a career there, and of course continuing to be there.
Exactly.
Mom was Canadian, dad was U.S. What was the mix there?
Both Canadian.
Both Canadian.
Yeah,
okay.
both Canadian.
So you brought on the U.S. citizenship later in life.
Exactly. Yeah. First one to come down here and get citizenship. So
yeah, awesome. Tell me about some of the early influencers, in your life. Anybody that particularly inspired you? I mean, starting with mom and dad. Anything that you recall from those days that you either observed or learned, or folks or teachers or coaches that you met along the way?
Yeah. So fabulously lucky to have some great teachers who really helped me, and some English teachers in particular who really got me going with love of language and love of communication, from both an academic perspective as well as a really pragmatic perspective, being able to use language in order to communicate effectively and help share ideas. So that was really important to me early on. Also, I played a lot of sports. And so that was very central.
Which sports
to my
were your most
experience.
interest? Which ones?
Primarily swimming. I was very into swimming.
And
I found that to be a wonderful combination of individual accomplishment as well as team accomplishment.
Right.
It was nice to have both sides of that in that sport, but I got very accustomed to, being in the pool or in the lake every day at 5 a.m.
Wow.
So it gives you a good discipline.
Competitive? Did you compete through high school, junior high?
Yeah, very competitive. Started in the 5th grade and competed all the way through the end of high school, and got D3 recruited, if you will, for college, but ended up playing a different sport in college.
Okay, got it. What was that?
Squash.
And squash. Okay, got it. Terrific. So, were you a good student in secondary school?
I reluctantly have to say I was not a great student. I always felt like I could have done more, but felt like I needed to keep the peace at home and maintain a certain grade point level in order to do that. But more was not necessary. So put all that other energy into other things and not as much into school as I perhaps should have.
Was it just because you kind of excelled at the things you liked and were kind of bored with the rest of the stuff, or how did that kind of play out?
Yeah, it was, I think it was a combination of a few different things.
Yeah.
One is I just had a lot of other interests
right.
that took my mind. And two, I didn't see a lot of margin in being the very best student at that point. It just didn't seem like the best use of my time.
Time versus reward, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. So other than sports, you mentioned swimming and then eventually getting into squash. Were there other interests, music, theater, debate? How did you spend your time growing up?
Yeah, a lot of different sports. So swam, played a lot of tennis, did cross-country skiing, downhill skiing,
Nice.
Variety of other things that caught my interest along the way. Dabbled in music, but never got the passion there.
Right.
Always wanted to be a writer. So I actually spent a lot of time writing when I was younger.
You're probably an avid reader as well. Usually those go hand in hand.
Very avid reader. Yeah, I would read a lot.
What kind of writing did you consider at that time?
A whole bunch of different things. I've always been very interested in personalities and human beings, and I feel like the characteristics of personality are so fascinating.
Right.
So I toyed with a lot of that when I was in high school. And there were also some genres that were specifically interesting to me.
Yeah, cool.
Always liked mystery novels and sci-fi novels as well. There's some aspect of the world that are created in those kinds of environments that I find very creative.
We share that in common. I love that. Love that area. And with regards to, entrepreneurial activities, you mentioned both mom and dad were entrepreneurs. Growing up in Canada, of course, is a little bit different than growing up in the U.S. I don't know if you have the ubiquitous paper route or the other types of things, but were you involved in anything entrepreneurial growing up?
Yeah, a number of different things. I had that paper route with a bit of a different spin.
Right.
So I spent all of my summers on a lake north of Toronto, and I actually did a paper route by boat.
Oh my gosh, that's cool! How awesome is that? That's great.
So for many years, it was actually the highest earning job I'd ever had because I built this fabulous little business. Actually had the experience of a guy who'd done it before, and he was unwilling to sell me his route, so I ended up creating my own route.
Oh my gosh!
And carved out effectively a good business. That was my start in business.
That's great. How many houses were on the lake?
Well, there was about 120 on my route.
Wow.
It was probably 4 or 5 times as many cottages in my area, but just managed to sell, and it was a very early lesson on sales.
Great.
A very early lesson on making sure people paid you as well.
I was going to say, did you have to go and literally collect as well? Was that part of the game back then? Yeah.
I did.
Awesome. Did you have to get out of the boat to deliver it, or were you able to literally, get your arm strength up and make the porch from the lakeside?
I did not. Okay. I would say my aim got good enough that 19 out of 20 times I could hit the dock without even stopping the boat completely.
That's great. Yeah. I love it. And were you, bound for college? Was that something that mom and dad expected? And did some of that money go aside to help that, or did that kind of come later?
Yeah, to be honest, it never even occurred to me not to go to college. So I was fait accompli from the beginning. And again, I'm fortunate in so many different ways, one of which is my parents were able to pay for college. So that was never an issue for me.
That's awesome. You went to 2 great colleges, obviously Vassar for your undergrad, and then on to Chicago Booth for your master's. What made you choose to come to the state? Was that when you first came to the U.S. then, when you came down to Vassar, or has you been prior to that?
Yeah, that was when I first moved to the States, and it really, the Canadian educational system is fabulous in its own way. It is. Yeah.
Much bigger schools. People don't realize
schools.
That. 50, 60,000, I think, University of Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, and some of the others are high, but
exactly. Yeah,
Vassar is a very different experience.
Very, very different experience. Yeah, a small school in Canada is 15,000 people. A big school is 100,000.
Right.
And one of the things, having some early self-knowledge was served me well. One of those things was I knew that if I was in a classroom with 1,000 kids, I wasn't going to learn anything. I was going to go off and do other things. And so I needed to be in a place where it was a much more intimate experience. And so I started looking south to the U.S. and found Vassar.
What attracted you to Vassar? I mean, obviously you played squash. I'm sure that was one of the key things there. But Vassar was, I believe, a women's only college for many years. And then did that change over about 20, 30 years ago? I don't recall how long that's been co-ed.
Well, it's actually still all women's, but they let me in. No, I'm just kidding.
Lucky you.
No, it went co-ed, I believe, in 68 or 69, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been a good long while.
40, 50 years. Right.
Yeah. But it, a number of things attracted me. One, they let me in, which, was very appreciated. It made a big difference in my school selection. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And, I really liked the intimacy of the educational experience there and the way in which you could really get to know your professors and the degree to which they focused on what I would describe as core liberal arts skills. Critical
one of the
thinking.
Strongest liberal art colleges.
It really is. I'm a big fan of that style of education overall. And it served me particularly well because of what I needed at that time. But, the critical thinking characteristics, communication, education, some of those core skills that I still use today, every day, really fit me well.
And you went and you got your degree, I think, in both political science and economics, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
What made you choose those fields?
Well, I was obsessed with politics coming in.
Okay.
And so that was
American politics or Canadian politics?
Actually, American politics.
Okay.
One of my favorite classes in high school was an American history class that I took.
Right.
And
because Clinton was president back then, I think.
Correct.
92, 93. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I just, I thought in contrast to Canada, where, Canadian history is all about everybody agreeing at different points in life, the U.S. had all of this fabulous conflict and, interesting challenges along the way that had helped this nation form into what it is today. And I was just fascinated by that. So American politics was actually my concentration and where I spent my initial years focused at Vassar. But then I, at the end of sophomore year, took an economics class and fell in love. It just, it explained so much about how the world worked to me.
Right.
And I'd never had exposure to economics as a discipline before that. And one of the great things about liberal arts colleges and Vassar in particular is that your major didn't necessarily need to be all of your classes. It was a proportion, but not all. So I was able to, not just major in political science and economics, but also take classes in, I think, 8 other departments in addition. So
yeah, awesome. And you did about 4 or 5 years of work before going back to get your MBA. Did you kind of have that in mind when you graduated, that you would get your MBA at one point in time, or did that opportunity come up as you got into the workforce and decided you need to make a pivot at some point?
Yeah, I can't say that I had it in mind when I graduated from college, but I went to work immediately after college at a small consulting firm where all of the senior people all had MBAs. And that was very, it was something I didn't know about at that point. And it was something that caught my eye as an interesting next step and an opportunity to really take some time out from the workforce and explore opportunities in a way that you really don't get that many chances to do that in the course of a career.
Right. Awesome. Did you have leadership responsibilities early on? Start managing people in those first few jobs, or did that come later after your MBA?
I did. I had some actually got incredibly lucky to have a kind of amazing set of events happen. I was working for a company called Interbrand. It was my second job out of college. Yeah. And I joined a previous boss from my first company who, when he started the second company, gave me a call and asked me to come join him, and I did.
And that was in New York City, right?
That was in New York City.
Not too far from Vassar. Yeah.
Exactly. And we had the entire leadership of the San Francisco office of Interbrand at that time all went together to go join a startup. This was during the first dot-com boom. And they became the marketing department of that startup. And of course, that Interbrand San Francisco office, which was a fairly substantial operation for the company, it was probably 30 or 40 people, was left without any leadership.
My goodness.
And I put my hand up at all of age 23, I believe, at that time, and was sent out to lead the San Francisco office in the interim.
Fantastic. Wow.
And that was my first taste of leadership, and it was terrifying.
You had to rebuild, right? You had to go out and hire people and put the people in place. Wow.
Exactly. Wow. And hold on to, the goal at that time that my boss, the president of the Americas, had set out for me was to try to only lose half the clients.
Let's keep the bar real low here.
Exactly. If we only lose half the clients, that will be a good day. Right?
Oh goodness.
And it was an incredible team out there. There was so much depth in the team there, and we were really able to do some remarkable things at a really interesting times. We came up with a couple of products that were very specifically geared towards the .coms at the time, and we ended up actually growing the book by about 25% when I was out there.
Good for you. What were some of the biggest challenges that you had, particularly on the people side, given your age, and obviously, you probably needed to bring in people with deeper experience, right, in terms of their background, et cetera.
Yeah, well, it was my first experience of what I've later mentored lots of folks with, what I describe as non-positional leadership. You're the interim, you don't have official leadership position. You can't rely on that. And in my case, I was 5, 10, 15, in some cases 20 years younger
I can imagine.
than anybody out there. So it was a real trial by fire to figure out how to get this group all pointed in the same direction and not just to go, head for the exits and look for work.
Right.
So that was absolutely a focus. Recruiting was less my focus. There were other people working on recruiting. I was really focused on the clients and the team that was in place there.
Yeah. Great. Terrific. And then shortly after that, I think you went on to, is it Secola Martin? Is that the name of the operation?
Correct.
And moved down to Texas for a while, or did you work out of the West Coast? No, you would.
Yeah, moved down to Austin.
Yeah.
It seemed like a fascinating place to be and an interesting job to do, and got the chance to work in a really remarkable little agency that was doing great work in the technology space. It was basically a B2B technology agency. Had 6 or 7 tremendous clients. Was doing wonderfully creative work in a space that at the time was really not great. So much of the work was just, here's a picture of the box that we're making, and 2 or 3 claims. And Secola Martin was doing some really creative work, and I got to be at the center of that, really thinking through the strategy and the messaging for our clients.
Awesome.
It was a great experience for a few years.
And then from there to Booth, right? Now,
exactly.
Was there a pivotal point there that you decided you needed to go back? Was there something that you saw missing in your toolbox that you wanted to go have, or was it just time?
I think it was a combination of factors. One, this is 2002.
Right.
So the world was
exploding,
imploding, and
right, or imploding, perhaps was a better way to say it. Yeah,
and I was in
good time to run for cover.
Yeah, exactly. That was absolutely part of my thinking. The company that I was with, unfortunately, went from about 160 employees down to about 25 in the time that I was there.
Yeah.
So 5-6 rounds of layoffs. It was just brutal. Felt like it might make sense to be somewhere else before my name made it on a list somewhere.
Now, were you and Rosalind married at the time, or was this still pre?
We hadn't met yet at that point.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
So business school was front and center in my mind. And actually, the week I left for business school, they eliminated my entire team. So my timing
is everything. Timing is everything. Yeah. And what made you choose Booth? Obviously, great school, terrific reputation.
Yeah, what I was looking for in a business school. So I had been in marketing for a few years at that point. And I'd really enjoyed my experience in marketing, found a lot of value from it, but wanted to complement that in a way. So I was looking at schools like MIT and Wharton and Booth, where I would really get a much more quantitative experience, exposure to finance, exposure to operations in a way that I hadn't had experience before. Right. So that was one of the primary drivers, and I was just thrilled to be admitted to Booth and have the chance to attend.
And you joined BCG, the Boston Consulting Group. Great opportunity. I'm sure they recruited actively there, and you probably had many opportunities. What made you decide to go with them?
Well, I joined them for the summer. I had a couple of different summer internship options, and frankly, I wasn't looking to get into consulting. I had not interviewed for a lot of consulting jobs. I'd interviewed for a couple. But had been looking more at operational roles within other businesses. And there were a lot of rotational programs at that point, and those looked really interesting to me. And BCG was not one of those.
Interesting.
And of the jobs I was offered, the BCG one seemed to be really a chance to get an experience within a legendary brand and a legendary firm. And it seemed like I was going to get exposure to things that I wouldn't get elsewhere, where I'd be in more of a more intimate kind of routine experience, if you will, as a summer intern. And it turned out to be that and more. I spent my summer trying to turn around a factory in Michigan. With 3,000 employees, and I'm this lowly intern who's trying to figure out whether this factory should continue.
Wow,
staggering amount of responsibility at that point, and I'm
dozens
really
of employees there too, I'm sure, and the impact of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Did you close it or open it?
We actually, I'm really proud to say that the team there was fabulous, and they had a whole bunch of really amazing ideas that just hadn't been able to attract the attention of the more senior folks in the manufacturing group. And we were able to channel a bunch of those ideas, get them exposure, save a ton of money, and make that plant operational and highly profitable. So
now you spent a couple of years there, and then pretty much since November of 06, you've been in the real estate business, right?
Yeah.
So going on 14 years. Were you exposed to that at BCG and therefore kind of set that strategy out, or was it kind of more happenstance that you went to EOP and then on to Essex, where we met a few years later?
Yeah, it was not something I was exposed to at BCG. But it was something I was doing in my personal time. I had kind of caught the bug of individual investing and was taking every spare dollar I could save and putting it into buying, in Chicago, what's known as three flats.
Right.
Small
townhouse type.
Exactly, townhouse style apartments. And bought my first and then my second, and was really enjoying that, and was feeling like BCG was not the place where I wanted to spend my career.
Right.
So I started looking at, is there a way I can take this passion for real estate and make that my day job as well as what I'm doing on the weekends and evenings?
Yeah. Well, you certainly have a passion for it. In fact, I remember the very first time we met and you were giving me a little bit of background. I was a little bit chagrined because I didn't get the chance to place you. You actually knocked on the door at Essex, if I recall the story correctly.
True, yeah.
Our mutual friend and your former boss, John Burkhardt, had actually told me about that position a few months ago. So I was waiting, and all of a sudden I got the call. Hey, Brad, I want you to come in and meet our new group vice president. But, it sounds like in real estate, you've really taken that entrepreneurial bent. We'll talk about Dwellsy in a moment, your current startup. But, did you kind of weave your way through the various companies? Because you've worked for some great ones, obviously Bentall Kennedy for a few years, and then you came out to San Francisco with them. Is that correct? Because you were originally in Chicago.
That's correct. Yeah. So, ended up at Equity Office, and it's actually kind of a funny story. We on my fourth day of work, the Blackstone acquisition of EOP was announced. So it was a very short-lived experience. I was tremendously excited about the job and the team there and everything, and it was a very short-lived experience. So that deal closed a few months later and ended up moving on. And I actually started a management consulting practice, kind of combining my BCG experience with wanting to be in the real estate space. And I'd met some folks who had some deal flow in the management consulting area for real estate companies. And it seemed like a nice idea to combine my ability to execute that work with their deal flow. Awesome. And spent the next 5 years building a management consultancy, which was a great opportunity to really understand how real estate businesses overall, but in particular real estate investment management businesses worked.
What is it about the industry that attracts you? You'd mentioned your passion for it, and I know that knowing you personally. But is it the housing of other people? Is it the ebb and flow? Is it the return? Is it the complexities of it? What is it that really attracts you to the industry?
I'd say a couple of different things. One is the physicality of it and how tangible it is, that it's not
hard assets.
Exactly. It's not some complex financial product that, you need a PhD in order to understand. You can
everybody needs one. Right? We need a roof over your heads.
And I think that's what you're talking about there, Brent, is the second thing, is how relevant it is to all of our lives. And how central real estate is, whether you're, living, working, shopping, sleeping, eating, whatever you're doing it in real estate, or you're transiting between real estate points. And so that importance to all of our lives has always made it really interesting. And then I think the last thing is just that it's always been an industry that is very old fashioned in a lot of ways. So it's just felt like a space where there's a lot of opportunity to make things work better. And that's one of the fundamental things that I like doing, is making things work better.
Would you say that there's been kind of a lack of innovation in the industry as well, and that you saw opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that brings us to Dwellsy. Obviously, you've been, almost 2 years now with that startup. I can't believe how fast that time's gone by. You got things going with your wife, Rosalind, and I think you've got a team of about 10 now, 12. How many people?
About a dozen folks. Yep.
About a dozen folks. Great. Tell us a little bit about the concept. And, let's start with kind of what led you to the startup, and then, the mission and vision of what you're trying to achieve there.
Yeah, absolutely. The central idea came from a couple of experiences I had in my most recent role at Essex. I would go out and talk to our residents regularly, and what I would hear from them is that the search for a place was just brutal. It had gotten dramatically worse. And then on the other side of that, one of my responsibilities at Essex was to rent 30,000 apartments a year. And working with all of the partners in the space, I could see it was very obvious that that industry was just not serving the property managers in that space well at all. Prices were going through the roof. The quality of leads was going way down. Very problematic for the landlords.
And for those of listeners that know, Essex Property Trust is what we're talking about. Largest REIT on the West Coast. I think that's still true. 60,000 units between San Diego and Seattle.
Yep.
Been publicly traded for 30 odd years. Very successful. And about 250 communities, right? I think up and down the coast. Is that about right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Great company. Still a client of ours as well. Full disclosure.
Yeah.
So you saw some gaps. You saw some holes.
Yeah, I saw a very obvious hole there that to be honest, it kind of took being in that spot, in that nexus of all of that,
right,
to see. And then, the other piece of it was that there was just no data available to manage the business.
Isn't that interesting?
Things that I would have counted on in any other space just didn't exist. Like you can't really tell what the pricing should be. You can't really tell how many units there are in a building. You can't really tell any of the kind of core characteristics of these very expensive assets that you think would be well documented. They just aren't. And I tried to go out to bid to buy some of that data from people I thought might have it, and nobody would sell it to me, either because they didn't have it or they weren't willing to sell it.
Yeah.
And
probably a combination of both, right?
Yeah, it seemed like an opportunity to solve a huge market problem on multiple fronts.
Yeah. Yeah. So what were the first steps? I mean, obviously, you've got a family, you've got small children. I believe Rosalind was doing consulting work at the time, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct,
big risk, big, kind of bet on making things happen. Tell us a little bit about how you came to that conclusion and, sold the wife and kids on, going down that road.
It's funny. So Rosalind and I have always been entrepreneurially oriented,
right.
And it's always been something we've wanted to do. She started a couple of companies over the years. I've always wanted to do the same. So we always knew this was in our DNA and something we were going to do at some point.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that was kind of part of the landscape, an important part of the landscape. But beyond that, it was a realization for me. I actually got a call from a search consultant right after I left Essex about a job that I should have been really excited about. It would have been, in many ways, a great
and
step
that wasn't
up.
me, by the way.
It was not you. It was not you. And it was funny because in substantiating how great a job was, this guy's telling me that, you'd be a board observer and you'd be on the senior management committee. He lists off 6 or 7 different committees that I'd be on. And at that moment, all I could think of was, oh my goodness, I'm going to be in corporate
all those committee meetings you've been in.
I'm going to be in committee meetings for the next 10 years.
Oh, goodness.
And that made me realize that I needed some time away from that corporate world, and that I needed to embrace a more entrepreneurial approach for my next step. And the idea for Dwellsy was already there. I'd been raging about the need to solve this problem to anybody who would listen for a while.
There you go. Yeah.
So it seemed like a no-brainer to go after it.
Was there anything about the uncertainty of it and the, success or perhaps lack of it that, gave you some fear or some trepidation before making that decision?
It's always nerve-wracking whenever you're making a change of any kind. And I'd say, I'm fortunate enough to be later in my career. I've had a number of interesting roles in, the kind of middle market companies that you profile so well on this podcast. And that's given me a certain amount of freedom. And I think, one of my friends from business school made a comment to me, and she's an entrepreneur as well. And she made a comment to me as I was thinking about starting it that said, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? You go back and get another high paying job.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And she's exactly right. And I think that one comment really freed me from worrying about that risk.
I had an entrepreneur the other day. His podcast can't be released, so I can't mention it yet, but he was talking about that same thing. He'd been very successful in technology ventures. And most entrepreneurs, people look at it and they think they're very risk oriented, but most smart entrepreneurs have a plan B.
Yeah.
Even with Richard Branson, when he got into the airlines business, was hugely risky. He had an EBITDA from, Virgin Music that was insane, well into the 8 figures. Yep. And so he knew, he would spend so much against this and marketing, so much against that. But if it all failed, he still had that EBITDA coming in every year.
Right.
And do you have that? Do you have your plan B, or is it, can always go back to the corporate workforce?
Yeah. I think the plan B, look, we are all in on Dwellsy. It is our all of our time.
It's Rosalind's full-time job too, right?
It's Rosalind's full-time job. Yeah. So our family is all in on this. So it would not be good if that did not work out. However, the reality is I've had great experience along the way, and
sure.
I think this experience only makes me more employable. So while this is the right thing for me and for our family right now, if it were, God forbid, not to work out the way I hope it will, I do have that plan B, which is to go get a job. And I'm sure I'd find an interesting job with great people.
Yeah. And I'd certainly be able to help you with that. Not that I intend to, but, by all means. Well, building a 12-member startup team is a very different approach than building out, a corporate team. And, you and I did that together. We brought in a number of people to your team. How has your leadership style evolved? If you think about, kind of how you've built that out now versus what you did in the corporate environment, what does it look like? How does it look different?
I think one of the things that's very freeing in this environment is the ability to take some risk on fabulous people who don't have what I would describe as kind of like corporate standard resume.
Right.
I've had this experience multiple times where, people around me have been hired, or I've hired people from my team who, they've done the right thing. They've done the job in progressive, roles for 20 years, and you hire them to do the job, and then you're disappointed when they can't do this other thing.
Yeah.
And we've been able to take some chances on some people who are really exceptional, who you just see that kernel of capability, and are able to give them that shot, even though their resume wouldn't necessarily suggest that they know exactly what to do on day one.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot more upside potential, and I've seen a lot more upside potential from those folks. So that's one of the things that I've had fun with in this environment versus in corporate environments previously.
How do you get at that, Jonas, and, making bets on those people you invest in and hire? It's one of the biggest things that so many CEOs tell me is that, the resume and the background, and maybe I have an hour, maybe we meet a couple of times, but, how do you kind of get at that character and that integrity? What are your approaches in trying to understand, what motivates and drives the people that you are looking to have join your team?
Yeah. Brent, I wish I had some magic on this. I certainly have not been anywhere close to a perfect hirer over the years. I have made my share of mistakes as well.
You're pretty good. In my book, you're pretty good.
I appreciate that.
But it is as much art and science.
Key to have great partners. I think one of the things that has been really valuable to me is to have trusted hiring partners. And I mean, working with somebody like you who's great, Brent, but also internal people who you really know and judge their ability to attract and retain great people, and are able to leverage them as well for complementary perspectives to your own.
Right.
So that's always helpful, and key to listen to them and not just make your own decisions, and regardless of what you hear from them. But the main thing for me is I always try to get into a work situation as best I can with people in interviews. So, everybody's got, this is the question I asked, that's the question I asked. For me, it's much more about how do we recreate a work situation? So I always try to set up a
case study,
how would you handle? And it's kind of getting back to my consulting days a little bit, setting up a bit of a case study. Like, here's a situation, here's something that we're actually really wrestling with.
Right.
Let's spend 2 or 3 hours and talk about it. I remember, one candidate that you and I worked with, I think I spent 4 hours with her in a restaurant one day going through a particular problem. I was just so impressed with her thinking and capability. That's the kind of interview experience that I have always found that's served me well. And I've always looked for those people who want to solve problems in an effective and elegant way for their own sake.
Right.
And if they have that internal drive, then they can kind of do anything.
Kind of doing the right thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Folks that really want to do the right thing and want to make a difference.
Exactly.
A startup is so unique in so many ways, Jonas, and you know this from living it. But building a company culture, is really, what sustains a company over time. And you work for some great companies, Essex, obviously BCG, your early days at Interbrand. What is it that you would say is kind of unique or perhaps unusual that you're trying to build at Dwellsey that differentiates you, not just to your clients and your customers, but also to your staff?
What's unique in my experience is we have a true mission orientation at Dwellsey. The companies I've worked for before, I think we've gone through an era the last 20 years where it's been 100% shareholder return focus, and that has always been the kind of sole focus, and that's important to us here at Dwellsey. But one of the most inspiring experiences I've had of working in a company and being a leader in a company was at what is now Bentall GreenOak. At the time, it was Bentall Kennedy, where there was a real passion around the fiduciary aspects of the business and a real sense of understanding who our clients were and what we needed to do in order to do an exceptional job for them. And there was an understanding that in the end, we were actually going to make a better experience for the employees, a better outcome for our clients, and better outcome for our investors by bringing that mission orientation. And a lot of the other companies I work for, well, I've been fortunate to work for wonderful companies, have not had that backbone to them. And that's one of the things that I've tried to build in from the beginning at Dwellsey, which is there's 110 million renters in this country. And the status quo is really terrible for them.
It's a low bar.
It's a horribly, like, the status quo is it's appalling in many ways. And we're going to make the world a lot better for 110 million renters, for 10 million landlords. They're going to have a much better experience selecting and occupying their home, which is a sacred concept. That mission orientation is critical to the culture we're building at Dwellsey, and I have worked to and hope everybody feels that very cleanly and very clearly, that's at the center of what we're trying to do. And we accomplish that goal, we're going to change the world.
Yeah. Awesome. I was so impressed. I know you've recently started your own podcast, and I listened to the first episode out, and you had a very, very astute renter, who I think is part of your community. And I was so impressed with her ability to be able to just zero in on the types of things that were really important in, making that apartment choice and, the struggles that she went through and, the kind of challenges they have. Are you, kind of finding that your customer base, has very unique needs that just haven't been met, and are you kind of structuring your service in such a way that meets those differently than everyone else? Is that kind of part of your mission?
Yeah, that's exactly right. For most of your listeners, they'll probably think of Craigslist as the primary place to go for rentals, which we can all talk about how bad that experience is.
My goodness,
and there's no point going into that in more detail. But what's fascinating,
but it is the most available source. I mean, it's just
it used to be. They have very few actually legit listings anymore. Most of what's on there is fraudulent. Unfortunately, the fraudsters have figured out that it's a pretty free and open place for them to operate. So they're most of what's there now, unfortunately. But on the other, pay to play sites, the landlord is their client, which is fine. That's perfectly reasonable strategy for them to have. But it means that if you're a renter and you go to their site, what you will see is not what you're looking for. You will see in order the people who paid the most to show you the listings, and then the people who paid the next most, and then the people who paid the next most. And they'll go so far as to, provide these small, sketchy-looking listings for the people who pay the least on those sites. And it's just a terrible experience. They're not actually helping the renter. They have very few renter services. The renter is not their client. The renter is the product that they are offering to landlords. And, it's an opportunity for us to make a very build a very different business and make a very different product that serves that renter in an exceptional way and puts them at the center of the experience that we're trying to build.
So you're really kind of creating this true organic search, free ecosystem, I think is the way you've described it, opportunity, right? They can go to your site and be able to truly understand what's available in the area in which they're looking.
Correct. That's exactly right. I think we're the only platform that offers true organic search. There are no paid listings. That's very intentional. That will always be the case. Because we just don't want to junk up the search experience. You
awesome.
Think about Google a few years ago. It was a very clean experience. It was very easy to find what you're looking for, and I think they've pushed it so far the other direction now.
Oh, you have to go to page 2 or 3 to get the stuff that's natural. Yeah, you got to go below the fold
to find any organic results, and it's become difficult. And they've opened themselves up to competition from other players like DuckDuckGo and others who are taking a pure approach.
Right.
They have such a dominant market position. I don't know if anybody else will be able to challenge, but I think there's a real opportunity since, the other sites right now serve a very small slice of the population, really only the top 20% of renters in the socioeconomically speaking. And it's all ads. There's nothing else.
That's right. No, it's true. It's true. But your revenue model then is going to be much more than providing ancillary and additional services then to your community. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, very much a freemium type business model where we have
come in, get free organic search, and then hey, if you like us, stick around. We've got some other things that we can help you out with in your apartment hunting and moving in experience.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jonas, you've been very, very generous with your time. We have a couple last questions though, and one obviously relating to COVID, and it looks like this is going to be something we're in for a while. You're in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm back out at our place in Connecticut, and we've got spikes going on everywhere, and of course everybody's talking about how bad the fall is going to be. What does the world look like, particularly as it relates to people that are apartment hunting, that are using your service in kind of a post-COVID world? Are you making changes to your model? Do you see things that are, kind of play out a little differently in the future for your staff and for your customers, or is it kind of business as usual from your perspective?
Yeah, I question this every day, but I think we are one of those rare companies where what COVID has done is really reinforce the need for the service that we are already providing.
Particularly today when you can't go and get an appointment, right, and see something.
Exactly. It's that much harder to go search for a place. The online tools are that much more important.
Interesting.
And the very service that we provide has become that much more essential to people. Right. So I question that every day because I cannot imagine that there's not more, both challenge and opportunity that comes from this for our business, because so many businesses have been forced to change how they operate as a result of it. But best I can tell, that seems to be the case.
There'll be continued tweaking, I'm sure, as we go. Wonderful.
Of course. Yeah.
Well, last, what we've got a lot of our audience that are, folks that are 10, 15 years younger than you, 20, 30 years younger than me. And, what kind of career and life advice would you give them if they're listening in? It's someone that maybe has their eyes in the corner office or perhaps wants to be an entrepreneur someday like you've been.
Yeah, I'd give a couple of pieces of advice. The more cliched, but I think critical piece of advice that I got early on from a mentor who's still a mentor to me today is to take the biggest challenge in front of you. And if you have a choice between roles and opportunities, take the one that scares you more. Very much cliche, but I think very much true. Another point is you have to know yourself and invest that time to understand what you're good at and put yourself in situations where that can come out and where you can really allow that to thrive.
Well, Jonas Bordo, co-founder and CEO at Dwellsy, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Brant, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.